Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And Debbie, thank you for the reminder about Yom HaZikaron. Hashem should remember all those who have fallen in the defense of the state of Israel. We should remember them all. L'tov. Okay, chapter 17, verse 11. Chapter 17, verse 11. We began discussing this pasuk yesterday. It's a very interesting prohibition on consuming blood. You know, what's so bad about blood? So God says that soul of flesh depends on blood, and then God also speaks about that the blood is used on the altar. What's it all about? So there's an interesting Ramban over here. Ramban on pasuk Yud Aleph. Ki nefesh habasar badam hi va'ani nisativ lachem al mizbeach. Mashmos hakosvas eshiyomar. The implication of this verse is Sheyeyaser lanu adam b'bnei shenitno lanu liyoser lamizbeach l'chaper al nafshosenu v'uchelik Hashem kitam hachelev. So the end of the pasuk sounds like, middle of the pasuk sounds like that. Look, God said that the blood of animals should be placed on the altar as a means of gaining atonement for us, and therefore it's something for the divine. And it's disrespectful for me to be partaking of it. And the Ramban says you could say a similar thing by the forbidden fats, that the forbidden fats, the idea is these are burnt on the altar. These are parts of an animal that are for God, not for me. So then you could pose the question, there are all kinds of creatures that are not brought on the altar. So if the whole reason why I can't eat blood is because the blood is for God on the altar, so then that should be for animals that are brought as, or types of animals that are brought as offerings. But why would it be an issue for the blood of every single animal? Nidches HaShoel, if a person poses that question, we can push off the question. That God didn't want us to make a mistake. And therefore he said, you know what, just stay away from blood in general. The reason for it is for blood of these specific animals, but you're just wise to stay away from blood in general. God didn't say that by fat. God doesn't prohibit the fat of these broad ranges of animals that are not brought on the altar. It's really only the types of animals that are brought on the altar. But, maybe fat is very recognizable. Maybe it's different than blood. This is what the Ramban says. The Rambam writes, that the Kasdians just didn't want to have anything to do with blood, and they thought of it as a sign of impurity. But people who wanted to connect to demons and tell the future based on connection to demons would be very into consuming blood. And what the Torah is interested in is pushing back against these wild ideas. So the Rambam says that's why God says, I don't want you to consume dam, because there are people in this world who do this nutty stuff with dam, and this is how they want to connect to demons and future telling. Just don't have it. And in fact, what you should do with the dam is you should only use the blood in manners of serving God, in sprinkling blood of offerings and casting blood on the altar, etc. That's what the Rambam says. This is very similar to other comments we've had from the Rambam, that according to the Rambam, many things that we do or don't do are to distance between ourselves and idol worship and the like. According to the idea of the Rambam, there's a fascinating parallel that we have in our psukim, that if a person eats blood, God says, I will cast my face on that person. It's interesting language, but we also have that language by a person who brings his child to the Molech, which was an avodah zarah of passing a child through fire. So the idea is, if both of them are related to idol worship, so then it makes sense that there's a parallel language. So Ramban says it makes a lot of sense, but it's hard to see this in the verses. Shem Yomru Tamid B'Tamo Iser Ki Nefesh Kol Basar Damo B'Nafsho, because the language in the pasuk is because blood is such a core component of the life force of this creature. What does that have to do with demons? What does that have to do with Avodah Zarah? Ki Nefesh HaBasar B'Adam Hi V'Yichser B'Mishnah Torah Chazak L'Votiach Ol Adam Ki Adam Hu HaNefesh V'Lo Sachal Nefeshim HaBasar. He cites 3 different psukim that are all about the fact of the connection between blood and soul. The Ramban says, what I think the pshat is Kashem Barakol Anivroim Atachtonim L'Tzorach HaAdam. God created all of the creatures of the world to serve man. Kihu Levada Bohem Makir Esporo, because humanity is the only species that can recognize God. V'Afal Pikein Lo Hitir Lohem Ba'achila Mitchila Rak HaTzomeach. Even though God creates all these life forms in the world to be of service to humanity in our own pursuit, the bottom line is, at the beginning, when the world was first created, God did not allow us to kill creatures to eat them. We were only allowed to eat vegetation. Fruit, God says to Adam at the beginning, behold, I've given you all the grass of the field. Only after the flood that all of these animals that were saved on the ark were saved in the merits of Noah. And then Noah brings an offering to God. At that point, God permitted the bringing of the, God permitted humanity to consume animals. God says the same way that I've given you grass up until now I'll give you animals. Because the whole reason these animals are alive today is thanks to mankind. So therefore, the body of the animal can be used by humanity. Even the soul of an animal is of use to a person, because a person can bring an animal as a korban, as an atonement. But the idea of eating the soul of the animal, that doesn't seem to fit. Of course, when we want to eat an animal, we kill the animal first, so we take the animal's life, but that's still relating to the body of the animal. And we say that we're allowed to kill the animal to eat it, because if not for us, the animals wouldn't be around anyway. But the idea of taking the soul of the animal, God gives us a way to take the soul of the animal, which is to bring it as an offering. A being of a soul should not be consuming another soul. Because all of the souls in the world are for God. According to the pasuk from Koheles, that how a man dies, an animal dies. We all have the same type of spirit. So it's not for us to take the soul of an animal, it's for us to take the body of an animal. The purpose of our soul is to serve God. We can use the animal soul to serve God. We're going to skip the next 2 paragraphs. It's probably skipping around 15 lines. And that's what it means. Therefore, I've said to the Jewish people, that's in verse 12, being that the blood represents the soul of the animal, and it's not appropriate for us to consume of that soul. So I now am having mercy on the soul of the person. Al nafsho. I've placed in mercy for humanity, I've allowed the soul of an animal to be used on the altar instead of the soul of a person. But be careful not to consume of the blood. Okay, so but the point is, now we understand the psukim. There were really 2 points made in the psukim. The blood is connected to the soul of the animal, and the blood is used on the altar. So what God is saying is, it's not appropriate for you to partake of the soul of another creature. And the blood is, to partake of the blood is the equivalent of partaking of the soul. If it's not appropriate for you to partake of the soul, how can you do that on the altar? How can you put the blood on the altar? The answer is because that's in service of God. And my soul is in service of God, the animal soul in service of God, and God gave me this model, bringing korbanos in this way. Just skipping a few more lines. Ulakach tzivot l'chasos kol dam b'chai ba'of k'lo yiskarev damam al hamizbeach ki gam ba'ofos liyikrab mehem rak shnei minim bovad v'gam mehem minim l'shchatim v'ba behemos rov hamatzuyim l'shchatim l'shem hanichbad v'dam l'chaper v'ein roi l'chasoso. So very interesting. There's a very interesting mitzvah called Kisoy Hadam. Kisoy Hadam is when we slaughter a bird or certain types of animals, more animals of the field than domestic type of animals, more the types of animals that we wouldn't use as an offering. There we're supposed to cover the blood. The idea seems to be out of respect to the blood of the animal, because what that really means is it's respect for the soul of the animal. Animals that are used for sacrifices, their blood is brought on the altar. We're already showing that respect. But types of animals that are not used for sacrifices at all, there's a whole other concept of Kisoy Adam. A very, very interesting Ramban to think about. We're going to go ahead now to chapter 18, verse 3. Verse 4. Chapter 18, verse 4. You should observe my laws to go with them. Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am Hashem your God. Verse 5. Ushmartem es chukosai v'mishpatai asher yaseh osam ha'adam v'chai b'hem. Observe my laws, that a person should do them and live by them. Ani Hashem. I am Hashem. What does it mean that we should do the laws to live by? What exactly are we talking about? So, at least for today, we'll see Rashi. It's the second Rashi on Pasuk Hey. V'chai bohem li'olam haba. We live by the mitzvos in the next world, the afterlife. Shim tomer b'olam hazeh v'lo sofa hu meis. If you say that the pshat in the pasuk is you'll do the mitzvos and you'll live by them in this world, so what does that mean? That means that if a person does a mitzvah, they're invincible, they can't die. We know that's not true. So what we're saying is, if we do mitzvahs in this world, our souls live on in the next, which of course is a very powerful thing to think about. That every time we do a mitzvah, we're attaining for ourselves another level of eternity. That seems to be the point. I think that's a powerful thing to think about. So we discussed the Rambam and the Ramban with blood, and now we discussed Rashi with living with the mitzvos, and God willing, we'll discuss the Ramban tomorrow.